All right, welcome everybody to Becoming Invaluable podcast today. We have a special guest with us, Dan Clark, who's one of our 9 interviewees in the book. And of course, we have Dr. Terry Lyles, my co-author on this book. And I just want to point out one more aspect of the book. Is our subtitle is called Develop the Willitude to Navigotiate Success. So Becoming Invaluable, develop the Willitude to Navigotiate Success. Today, we are going to be talking about both willitude and navigotiating our way through life and what happens in that experience and that journey. So with that, Terry, I'd love for you to please introduce Dan and let's get into the conversation, Dan.
Thank you, Steve, and Dan, welcome. And yeah, I know you probably have one of the toughest podcasts we're going to do because we're talking about 2 words we made up. Literally. So whatever you say is right. You know what I mean? So we're cool with that. And I love your background and your story. I know your history. I mean, you've been with some of the most amazing speakers on the planet, Zig Ziglar of the lives, you know, and you from stages to your background in sports. So I want people to know a little bit about you as we shared in your story in the book. Mm-hmm. And you are 48. That's the page you're on. So every interview, we have 9. So every 9 has a number. So you've just been tattooed with 48. So that's your number. So Dan, thank you for being here and share a little bit about who you are for people that may not know you as well as we do. And it flavors that in the book.
You know, it's an honor to be with you and Steve. Thanks for having me. You know, as you were both talking, it's kind of triggered a quote I heard many years ago. I don't know who came up with it, but they said, once you know your core values, once you're in alignment with your beliefs, 99% of our decisions are already made.
Yes.
And so just the honor of meeting both of you, the honor of sharing the platform with you, the honor of participating in your book, it validates all these little cliches and quotes that those of us who have been students of personal development and organizational excellence have heard our whole lives. And as a speaker, I teach my students. I've been a professor for 11 years at the university level, MBA, teaching advanced public speaking and intro public speaking. And I always remind my students, you don't prepare a speech, you prepare yourself to speak.
Yes.
And I always introduce what I call my speaker's triangle. It's an inverted triangle because visually it's a funnel. And the 3 questions that every human being craves the answers to in one-on-1, 1-on-12 in a board meeting, 1-on-30,000 in an arena. Number 1, why should I listen to you? It's the credibility piece. Have you done it and are you currently doing it?
Yes.
So you're the world famous stress coach, and Steve's the most successful entrepreneur I've ever met. Unbelievable how you come together. But we've been brought together because of our commonality in core beliefs. No one ever hits rock bottom. We hit rock foundation. We hit rock belief. We hit the baseline core values and governing principles on which we were raised. Yep. So no matter how hard it gets, no matter how tough life seems to be, we never hit rock bottom. We always hit rock belief. Can I do it? Why should I listen to you? Is the credibility piece. Question number 2, can I do it too? That's the power of your books, Performance Under Pressure, but now this new book, Becoming Invaluable. It's the roadmap. It's the behavioral Bible that basically takes all these clever quotes and puts it into reality and allows us to have that man in the mirror experience, that woman in the mirror experience, where we answer, where are you right now? Not later, not living in the past where it's like someone's trying to rob your house and you don't live there anymore. But what both of you do is you get us to focus in your book. You get us to focus in on answering, where are you right now? It's like ordering an Uber ride that requires that you enter in your current location. And if you lie about where you are, the directions won't work.
Right.
Question number 2 is the possibility. Can I do it too? with my past, with my limitations, with my weaknesses, and with my strengths. And because it's a funnel, you answer credibility and possibility. Now it begs the question of usability. How do I do what you tell me I can do? How do I get from where I am to where I want to be? What's your system? And that's the value of Willitude and Navigotiate, because it takes us from where we are as an individual reader, as an individual listener, and then puts the fuel in our Ferrari to allow us to take us wherever we want to go as fast as we need to go to accomplish our goal.
Right.
So,
and Dan, that's what we talked about. Actually, it was interesting. Our latest podcast was on chapter 3, which was purpose and values. And you could have been in that chapter too. We struggled with where to put you because we could have put you in any of the chapters. You know what I mean?
That's why you made up words that mean nothing until we get them, because
we wanted to have you. We wanted to see how good you were under pressure. You know what I mean? So we got you now. So Steve,
Dan, I love as Terry said, we know a bit about your story, and some of the people listening probably don't. And then when I think of Willitude, I think of you. In fact, we were interviewed on a podcast a few weeks ago, and I was asked the question about Willitude, and I, of course, defined it. The will and the fortitude to move through things. And the story I told was a little bit about your story. I'd love for you to just share, because I think the Willitude you had to get through what you went through coming out of college. I mean, just share a little bit about that and how you think of that experience and getting through that. The Willitude you showed in that experience is what most people, even including myself and Terry, have really ever had to do.
No, you're awesome. So let's just give me one second to give a preamble, because of what you're experts in and what we've all experienced. A quote that comes to mind when Dr. Terry talks about pressure: under pressure, you don't rise to the occasion, you fall to your level of training. That's why we train and prepare and practice so hard. So pressure is not something that's naturally there. It's created when you question your own ability, and when you know what you've been trained to do, there's never any question. Mm-hmm. The other thing I want to lay as a foundation is that pain is a signal to grow, not to suffer. And once we learn the lesson the pain is teaching us, the pain goes away. So in life, there's no mistakes, only lessons. But we have to hang around with the right people who can help us sift through the pain, take us through the journey of pain and ups and downs, to remind us that, as we've heard, you never win or lose. If you always learn.
Right.
You never lose, you never win if you always learn, and then you can continuously win. It's not just a one-off. So my story was a chance for me to validate statements I'd heard my whole life. Our parents, what do our mothers say tactfully when they think we're wusses, when they think we're bums, when they think we're lazy? They would never call us that. They say, "Oh, Daddy, you have so much potential."
Right.
And in reality, no one ever exceeds potential. We just misjudge it. So my story it's couched in my continuous drive to be excellent. So I had throat cancer when I was 8 years old. And one day later, with it expanding in my throat, one day more, it would have eaten through the wall into my vocal cords, and I would have never been able to speak one word or sing. And I've recorded a lot of music, written some songs, got some gold records. So my first recollection as an 8-year-old is in the hospital, overhearing the conversations of my parents and the doctors and nurses, and making a conscious decision: I'm getting out of here. No. This is not the end for me. I'm going to fire up. And I still remember that, guys. I still remember the intensity, the emotion that I felt in my hospital room. And sure enough, a few days later, the cancer was reversed, and I checked out, after the hospital stay. In high school, I was the Golden Gloves boxing champion. I was an alpine ski racing champion. I was the motocross champion. Not competing against others, but competing against what I'm capable of. Yeah. Based on my desire to prove true, you can if you think you can. All these little cliches that most people never test. I always tested them. And I know it was couched in conditional love, not throwing my parents under the bus. But my older brother was a genius, 4 degrees from major universities. That's sick. And if I compared myself against him, which I was forced to do, I was always kind of with a living life with low self-esteem, and I'm never enough. One time I came home with a report card from high school with a report card had 4 F's and 1 D on it. My dad's response, son, looks to me like you're spending too much time on one subject. And my mom thought I cheated. It was a tough family. Yeah. Older sister, amazing realtor, graduated from the university in fashion, merchandise, and design, top of her class. So obviously she sells real estate. Younger brother, mega wealthy, hugely successful investment banker, and then me. I'm the only athlete in my family, so it forced me to compete against what I was capable of to make sure I could prove to myself that I was needed, to prove to myself that I was invaluable, so that I had opportunity after opportunity to combine my will to succeed and excel, be valuable. Valuable is money. Valuable is a painting in my home, in your home. Valuable is something that's worth a lot of money or worth a lot. Invaluable means irreplaceable, so they're completely different. And I had to make sure I was irreplaceable in everything I did. So now I get into college. I have a great career. I played football and baseball. I had an invitation tryout out of high school with the Kansas City Royals as a pitcher. That was my best sport. Projected number 1 draft pick by the Oakland Raiders into the NFL. My desire to be a superstar was cut short one day at a tackling drill. Coach blew the whistle, and another player and I ran full speed into each other in a violent head-on collision, smashing my right shoulder into the cutting edge of my fiberglass pads, and we slammed to the ground. And when Lyles got off of me, I had compressed the 7th cervical vertebrae in my neck. I had severed the axillary nerve in my right deltoid, and I suffered a grade level 2 concussion, which is one of the worst. Cried myself to sleep, bad idea. My eye drooped. I had loss of speech. I couldn't talk anymore. My right side was paralyzed, and my arm dangled helplessly at my side, leaving me paralyzed for 14 months. I went to 16 doctors, 15 of whom told me I would not recover. I would never get any better. Anybody on this podcast heard that? What happens if we believe it? You never get any better. And my life spiraled downward until I hit what I thought was rock bottom. And now that I fought my way back to a 95% recovery, the 3 most frequently asked questions are these. What do you mean you thought you hit rock bottom? I already answered that. No one ever hits rock bottom. We hit rock relief. Number 2, why did I keep going to so many different doctors? Which brings us to Willitude. I kept going from doctor to doctor until I found one who believed I would get better. Mm-hmm. Who reminded me that knowledge is power, but it has no heart. We don't learn to know, we learn to do. All the information in the world isn't going to make a person successful. It's like the guy who has 3 PhDs, one in philosophy, one in psychology, one in sociology. He doesn't have a job, but at least he can explain why.
Exactly. Maybe.
Reason leads to conclusions, but it is emotion that leads to action. Willitude. Yeah. The will, the desire, not competing against others, but competing against what we're capable of, competing against ourselves, and then surrounding ourselves with people who believe in what we're trying to accomplish, who believe in who we are. And question number 3, Clark, what took me so long to recover? It's the answer to why is it taking so many people so long to pivot out of COVID?
Mhm.
Well, number one, pivot's a bad word because it means you're just going around in a circle. You pivot and end up exactly where you began. No, we need to regroup. We need to refocus on what it's going to take for us to become valuable again and then turn that into being invaluable, which is Navigotiate.
Yeah. And that's what I want to talk about is how do you do that? How did you transition from that, from your injury to becoming the speaker you are and the impactor and influencer you are? Because that's really the Willitude to go through that kind of a transition, as Steve came up with the word, and then Navigotiate, which is how do you know when to, and we talk about this in the book, all through the book, but in this chapter specifically, how do you negotiate something and navigate something? Because sometimes it's inverted. Sometimes we're trying to close a deal, but the person is not easy to work with. Sometimes we like the person and they don't know what they're doing, and we're trying to help them help themselves. So it's that process of how do you Navigotiate? So talk just a minute about that. Yeah.
So that's beautiful. And it brings us to the third question. What took me so long to get better? What took me so long? And the answer is, I was asking the wrong questions. I stayed paralyzed for 14 months because I was asking the doctors how to get better when I should have been asking myself why. And once we answer why, figuring out the how to becomes clear and simple. And here's the real deep answer to our discussion. It wasn't a rah, you can if you think you can. It's based in physiology.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we only focus on the what and the how, we only engage the brain. But when we add to that a passionate why, our willitude, and a compelling want, which is a meaningful goal, what does it mean to us? Why should I? When we add to that a passionate why and a meaningful want, it connects the head with the heart. Our muscles fire, our muscles engage, our blood pumps more rapidly, and our brains fire. And when we only engage the brain, when we only engage the head, when we only focus on the what and the how, no such motivational experience occurs. We can't access that reservoir of energy that all of us have. Remember, no one ever exceeds potential. We just misjudge it. And in that process, I needed a coach. In that process, I needed a mentor. In that process, I needed to associate with people who would remind me that first and foremost, as I was down suicidal ideology, I lost my identity. I thought I was a football player when in reality, that's just what I did, not who I am as a man. Mm-hmm. And when we identify ourselves in terms of what we do instead of who we are, we become human doings instead of human beings. I was so confused, guys. I was down. I was so lost my identity. And the vice president of the University of Utah brings me by a cassette tape to listen to by a, quote, motivational speaker by the name of Zig Ziglar. And I'd never heard of Zig Ziglar. I thought, whoa, his mom ran out of names. Right. Out of curiosity, I plugged it in and I listened to it, and it changed me forever. It introduced, without ever knowing it, the concepts of willitude and Navigotiate through the significance of and power of a story. So in a 45-minute speech, I didn't remember one fact or figure. Facts tell, stories sell. I remembered the story. Mm-hmm. I remember how it ignited me and taught me reason leads to conclusions, but it is emotion that leads to action. And that story helped me put meat on the bones of these cliches, these quotes that I'd heard my whole life, which is what your books have done, Terry, and it's what Becoming Invaluable does for all of us. That's why all of us need to not just buy one book, but to give it to all of our closest family members and associates so that we can school them and tutor them in this new language so that we can talk on a higher level and encourage one another as Zig encouraged me and as other people came into my life. And as I started to get better, it was payday. because I was invited to speak to a football team, which was not stressful. It was not intimidating. As I started to get better, I was asked to speak to a football team. I show up feeling sorry for myself. The coach has multiple sclerosis. He's battling for life. He's going to die. I have no reason or no right to ever complain again. I spoke before their football team, 7 out of the 8 games. They won the state championship. High school principal asked me to speak to the student body. That year, he calls 4 other friends. I spoke to 5 schools. Next year, I spoke to 13 schools, still trying to get better, still making progress. Zig Ziglar comes into town to do a PMA rally. I position myself, Zig, you saved my life. Going to take you to dinner? No. I'm coming back into town in 3 weeks to do a seminar. Call Lori Majors in my office. I set it up. I pick up Zig at the airport, 15-minute drive to the hotel. By the time we get to the hotel, he was curious enough about this high school assembly that I had created. There was none in existence in those days. Is there someplace I can see this? I'd already rented the small ballroom off the foyer of the huge hotel. Said I had a little slideshow, a little deal. I gave my 45-minute high school assembly mano a mano. He stands up crying, standing ovation. I'm crying. Next week, he flies me to Dallas to speak to his company. Next week, he sponsors me into the National Speakers Association. We meet in Chicago, and now I'm his protege, so I'm sitting at the table with Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, Charlie Tremendous Jones, Bob Murphy, Robert Schuller. I'm one of the boys, and Zig invites me and my wife to his Born to Win seminar in Dallas after the Speakers Association convention. First 5-day seminar, first exposure to real coaching and mentoring. And there, Zig introduced me to somebody who introduced me to Nancy Reagan, who invited me in the Reagan White House to take her Just Say No program to all 50 states. So between 1983 and 1989, I spoke in 3 high schools every day, 15 a week for 140 school days, did 100 college university campuses, and about that same number of teacher and services for 7.5 years to millions of teenagers and young adults. And in 1991, based on associations with individuals like you, I transitioned into the corporate arena. And interesting enough, the messages have never changed.
Right.
Just the delivery and the stories and experiences have changed. And that's the value of this podcast and the value of becoming invaluable.
Yeah, that's what we did and set out to do writing this book. Steve and I came together because we have all these conversations between ourselves. And Steve, we're going to wrap up in a second here, but just any last thoughts you have, because thank you, Dan, for just helping us in chapter 2, but throughout the book, you know what I mean? And, this was such an interesting challenge for Steve and I. And you've written a lot of books, it's like birthing a child. Like I think I've got 5 kids. You got a bunch of kids. Steve's got some kids. It's a work. It's a labor, but it's meaningful because somebody could pick up a book that we don't even know, and like Zig Ziglar did by his cassette tape. So, Steve, just any final thoughts before we conclude and give people where to find us?
Well, I just want to say to anyone listening that, first of all, if you aren't aware, Dan Clark is one of the top 10 public speakers in this country. He maybe the world, but in this country for sure. And he's also in the Hall of Fame as well, the Speakers Hall of Fame. And so we are really honored, Dan, to have you join us today to be in our book. We can't thank you enough. And your words are so spot on with everything that Terry and I believe. And so we hope that, the triangle on the book, the triangle between the 3 of us, has got a lot of power. And I'm so excited to share this message with the world. And I just believe that the world will see and hear this message, and it can make a difference. So join us in reading Becoming Invaluable, develop the Willitude to Navigotiate Success. Feel free to go to our website at becominginvaluable.com. And also, Dan, where can people find you?
Well, I was able to recover from my injury and pursue excellence because I took the time to make a list of things that are not negotiable, non-negotiable.
Yep.
values, core values, whatever. And in order for us to stay true to those, we need to stay in touch. We've heard from Dr. Jim Rohn, we become the average of the 5 people we associate with the most, even online.
Yes.
Means we must be willing to pay any price and travel any distance to associate with extraordinary human beings. And so you honor me. My website is danclark.com. You can access my coaching. One of my books is Speak Like a Pro. Another one's Story Selling. I love to coach executives and individuals on the power of storytelling. But you can follow me on Instagram, Facebook, social media on at Dan Clark Speak, SPEAK.
Okay, great.
And again, I just want to put my plug in for the value of reading this book. I've never missed a speech since 1982, 6,000 speeches in 75 countries. And it's not because I'm a noble man, it's because I know that there's at least one man and one woman in every one of my audiences who is hurting as badly as I was. And if I can possibly say something to save a marriage, to keep someone from taking their life, to ignite someone to follow their dream and become that entrepreneur that they know they could be, I will hop on a plane. I've had flights canceled. I've rented cars, driven 7 hours because I believe so wholeheartedly in the message and calling that we have to change the world. Yeah. So I just wanted to say that Steve and Dr. Terry, this is a calling for them, just as it's a calling for me. And Steve flattered me to put me in that equilateral triangle. But what I want to plead you to, my plea to all of us listening and participating together on this podcast, is that we don't just buy one book. We buy 10 books. We buy a case. Maybe a case will have 40 books now. And we buy the book and give it away as a gift, especially in the holiday season, for the same reason I've never missed a speech and for the same reason that the 3 of us are willing to do whatever it takes to get this message out.
Yes.
Because it is exponential, it's generational. And when you walk into a dentist's office or a doctor's office and there's a book, Becoming Invaluable, on the coffee table, be the philanthropist in your neighborhood. Buy a case and go around to all the professional groups so they can have a copy or two in their waiting room. Mm-hmm. Go to your local schools and just say, I will come and give a book report on Becoming Invaluable after you read it. It's one of the better projects I've ever been a participant in. And you can find me on page 48.
Exactly. That's your number. You'll never forget that one. So you are tattooed 48. So I want to see that one day. But Dan, thank you for your friendship and your endorsement, mainly your life, your story, because Steve and I and you all have stories, and shame on us if we don't tell our stories, good, bad, and ugly, because that's what changes people's lives. People don't, and we write about this in the book, Steve, you and I did. It's not about the successes. It's the failures that define us, that create something called success, whatever that might mean to whoever's listening. So danclark.com, Steve and I, you can find us on becominginvaluable.com. We really appreciate you, Dan, being here today. We're going to talk again soon. So for the sake of today, thank you for being here, Steve. We'll talk soon.
Thanks
for listening, everyone.
Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.